I guess the one thing I left off the slide is who am I? I'm Gerry Messmer, and I'm here to do a presentation on who was General William Henry Ashley. Two disclaimers up front. Number one, in researching this guy for the last year, General Ashley is very private. In all of the journal, diary notes, everything I read, cross-referenced with Atkinson, General Atkinson, or O'Fallon or others. At no time does he ever mention his family, his wives, or anything at home. Very strictly business. Second disclaimer is, I don't even know if that's him. Every picture that I've seen on the internet and history archives, it has, his name under it, but then when you dive into it, you can't find two sources saying it's definitively him. Okay, the only thing that I found in history was that he was described as a very slight man. So back then you're talking 5'7", 5'8" average height. So he's something either smaller than that or thinner than the average person. And the other reason why he's important is General Ashley is associated with the first Hawken rifle being built by the Hawkens. Before that, they were doing gun repair and things like that. And he came back from a journey, 1822 or 23, and he asked one of the Hawken brothers to build him a gun because he's tired of getting shot at from the Indians on the cliffs, and he needs a weapon that can range 200 yards. So they built him what's called the Ashley Hawken, or the Super Hawken as they referred to it back then. So it's very important. So when you think about the Hawken rifle being the official firearm of Missouri, that's probably the guy that should be the spokesman for it, is William Ashley. So some of the things that are the timeline of his life, I wanted to throw this up there just as a background. As with everybody that came west, they came from the east. He grew up in Hawken County, which is just west of Richmond. He was born in 1778 in the middle of the Revolution. Around 1800, 23rd of December seems to be the date. I've multiple sourced. He marries Sally Furbush. He then, soon after, removes and goes to St. Genevieve in the Louisiana Territory. There's not much about why or what takes him there. We just know he shows up there. 5 years later, he finds himself in St. Louis. He starts off as a captain, then a colonel, and then ends up as a brigadier general in the militia during the War of 1812. Which, by the way, I learned even as a retired Army guy. I didn't know that brigadier general back then was the highest militia rank. There was no general officer levels higher than that. Interesting thing about General Ashley is he was, we're going to get into it, but a businessman. He was a fur company owner. He was a politician. But the one thing that marks him as a successful person to me is, his businesses, a saltpeter operation, he was in lead and all kinds of, they all failed. And he was pretty much a business failure until the fur trade. That tells me about the guy that he sticks to it. He's focused. He keeps going, just like a successful person does. It's not whether you get knocked down, it's do you get up and keep trying. And Ashley was a guy that kept trying over and over and over. And I'm going to try to bring that point out and how he affected the fur trade and really the commerce of St. Louis and of Missouri through his actions. He does his first expedition west in 1822 as the lieutenant governor. So he's elected lieutenant governor in 1820, the first lieutenant governor of Missouri. In 1822, he takes his first expedition west, and he serves under the first governor, Alexander McNair. His second expedition is in 1823, but his ammunition wagon blew up, 800 pounds of powder, boop, lost all his supplies. And it's thought that he was given the Ashley Hawken after this trip by Sam Hawken. I've only seen that fact in one place, so it's hard to say for sure because I like to have 2 or 3 references. But that's generally what we accept as 1823. In June of 1823, he gets beaten by the Arikara Indians near the Grand River. As you can see, 12 men killed, 11 wounded. And then 2 who died. And there's a very funny story about the Arikara, which I'm going to get into a little bit later relative to me. 1824, He leaves Fort Atkinson right upstream, and he heads out to the first rendezvous at this exact location in southwest Wyoming near Flaming Gorge. 3 November, crossing through the west, a lot of people told him, "You're crazy, don't do it." I mean, he's going through the miserable winter, and it's a very harsh trip for him. He loses horses. I think he loses one man. He almost dies. But he's taken all of his trade goods and things to resupply his men out to the Green River for the first rendezvous. While he's doing that on the way in 1825, he's also doing an expedition into the Salt Lake, Great Salt Lake, which he names Lake Ashley, which that didn't stick. He established Fort Ashley on the banks, and he trades with the Indians. And then he holds the first rendezvous in 1825 on this site, and this is the plaque from that site. Some people will say, well, it was a one-day rendezvous. It was not a one-day rendezvous. Ashley was there for one day. He needed to borrow horses to get his hides from the rendezvous to the Bighorn River and to get the horses back so his trappers could go into the mountains. So the trappers were there for much more than one day because they needed to wait about 3 weeks for his men to come back with the horses. 1825, he marries again to Eliza Christie again. Nothing in his personal life. I have a relative about this era who had 3 wives, and I know from history that his first 2 wives died along with their babies in childbirth. The only assumption you can make is that's probably what happened here, because divorce was not a thing back then. So they must have died in childbirth or just died of a disease. Nobody knows. So then he holds a second rendezvous in Willow Valley near Hiram, Utah the following year, which he does attend. And then he sells the fur company, which was known as Ashley's 100 under him, to Jedediah Smith and another partner. His name just left me. It doesn't matter. In 1831, he gets elected to the term of the House, to Congress and the House of Representatives. Actually, he's nominated because the guy holding the office, Pettis, dies in a duel. So he's nominated to fill that position, and then he goes on to get successively elected a couple more terms. I'm going to get into some information, and I'll show you some stuff about his positions in Congress. I can't believe that any American today would have any fault with the things he discussed and argued about and was for as a congressman. He was very good, very astute, very sharp businessman, did not like to waste government money. He marries a third time to Elizabeth Moss Wilcox Crittenden, who's a widow, with no children. So I have absolutely no clue at this point, unless I start doing Ancestry.com and tracking him and his father, if he even had children that survived. I have no idea. He does win the election of this seat in 32 and then again in 34. In 36, he doesn't run because he wants to run for governor, and he loses that race. And then he dies of pneumonia right up river, not far away, at age 59. And he's buried on an Indian mound there. And I actually have a picture of that from when I was there. So it's a very short 58-year life. Of course, back then that's a long life. But for us, you know, I'm 59 right now, so I'd be dead if I was him a year ago. So he started off, when he went into the fur business, he had this ad, which a lot of you have probably seen in historical things, looking for enterprising young men. 100 guys respond. Among them, some of the famous trappers that we read about: Jedediah Smith, Tom Fitzpatrick, Sublett, Bridger, Glass, Feynman, Davy Jackson. They all respond. They go out as part of the initial Ashley's 100. And they go out in like 1822 or 23. And they go out. So they're out there, let's just pretend it's 1823, and the first rendezvous is in 1825. So his men had been out there for 2 years with no resupply. He hasn't gotten the hides that they had trapped and brought back. And basically his men were living off the land, or they were living with Native American tribes to survive. So that's how he gets started. And I threw this in. This is very interesting about Ashley when I go back to talking about him being a businessman and very serious. And everything I read, everything he writes is very serious. There's no levity, there's no jokes, there's nothing fun in it. Everything is serious. But if you just read this statement, I just think this was one I pulled out from some records that I thought it was pretty interesting, because the British regard for Ashley, the militia general, who had been a farmer, a shopkeeper, a miner, and laterly an Indian trader, was not heightened in his stature by his traffic with deserters from the British fur parties. Ashley's successors, who according to the British had all at once promoted themselves to the title of captains, would be no more welcome as competitors than the militia general himself. So he was very, in the first rendezvous and subsequent, guys that were abandoning other British and Astor owned or whoever trapping companies, he was taking them on and recruiting them into his company. So it was a very, the tension in the trade was no different than today. Very, a lot of tension between all the factions. And then that battle we talked about with the Ricker in 1823, he abandoned the trading post concept and he became the father of the rendezvous. So up until then, the gathering of beaver hides was relegated to a trading post, getting them from the Indian tribes, bringing them in and trade goods with them. But then that wasn't working because there was a lot of tension between the Indians and the trade posts and all that, and it was not profitable. So you go back to Ashley the businessman, you know, he's not just a businessman, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about his out there as a mountain man. He's learning, studying, and understanding the fur trade industry and why it is or isn't working and how can it be made to be successful and how can he become a success at it. And then as the end result, he goes to the rendezvous system and totally away from the trading posts. So the first fur trade rendezvous, this is an A.J. Miller painting of one, which is pretty neat because everybody pictures these rendezvous full of, you know, Anglo trappers, and really they were a small part of it. You know, the natives came with their families, their wives, their teepees, everything was huge. There's rendezvous recorded where there's over 1,000 Indians at it and maybe a couple of hundred, you know, white trappers. But the businessman and how he revolutionized that whole system through from trading posts to the rendezvous system is captured, I think, really well by George Laycock, where he says, you know, all the fur gatherers going to the mountains, no individual had a more profound effect on the life and methods of the beaver trappers than William Ashley. And then he goes on to say he was a tough and daring organizer, a businessman, sometimes politician, you know, with the ability to stand back from the fur trade business, see why it wasn't working, and substitute his own methods. So, and it was him who started relying on his own trappers rather than the barter. He was the first fur company owner to do that, to have his employees, if you will. This is Ashley's return in 1825. This is a page out of his actual journal. And I put this in here because if you weren't here last year, you don't know anything about me. Me and two guys recreated William Ashley's return from that first rendezvous in 1825, traveling 2,000 miles. And same methods, the horse, the bull boat. We did use a pirogue and then a scale-sized keel boat. But then I found in a couple of places in history where he talks about that very return trip. He took 20 men, they raised the cash, and I was twice attacked by Indians, first by a party of Blackfeet by 60 in number, some men killed, and he talks about this whole return from the first rendezvous, which basically this is what we did, what he did. He can't get from Southwest Wyoming to St. Louis on horse. He can't borrow his men's horses and ride from here and back fast enough so his men can get back to the mountains trapping. So he borrows the horses and he rides to the Bighorn River. He sends half the men back with the horses. Then they go down the Bighorn to the Yellowstone to the Missouri River, and then they get on a keel boat with General Atkinson, who's a military guy going up doing treaties with the Indians. And he comes down the Missouri River, and that's the route he took, and that's the same route that we followed in 2019. And what's interesting about this is, back to the Arikara, so we're at the confluence of the Yellowstone and Missouri River. We had just finished up the second portion in the bull boat and the pirogues, and we're on the the site of what is now Fort Union, which came after Ashley's trip. And we wanted to camp in the fort, and they said, well, we can't. We don't have any rangers working right now. It's the wrong time of year with insurance. We can't have a fire in there. And we're like, fine, we'll just go out in the field. We've been flat camping for 2 months, whatever. And they said, well, but we have a teepee we can set up for you. And I said, and the three of us said, well, we'll take it, you know. So the guy that comes out to set up the teepee with us, his name is Joseph Yellowfeather. Ding, ding, ding. So I said to Joseph, I said, so do you know about this trip that we're doing, this Ashley's return trip? And he kind of laughs. He goes, yeah, I know all about it. And I said, well, how do you know about it? He said, well, my great-grandfather, he says, I'm a RICRA. My great-grandfather was a RICRA, and he was on the war party that killed 2 of Ashley's men on this trip. So, not making it up. You can't make it up. And then these notes are also found in another history place that if you're not familiar with it and you're a history guru, you need to be. It's something I stumbled onto that's very interesting. But he leaves on the 2nd of July and he gets back October 4th. As a side note, we left on the 6th of July, 4 days later. We got back on October 8th, 8 days later, or 4 days later. Same amount of 95 days on the trail as him. And when he arrives here at Fort Union, in his journals, he arrives on the afternoon of August 19th. We arrived the afternoon of August 19th. Didn't plan it, just happened out that way. And on that journey, we finished our journey right here at St. Charles, about a half a mile downstream. But 20 miles above the city, he sends his dispatcher down to his agents, letting him know of his great success, his imminent arrival, and a big celebration is taken up. And they were saluted by artillery and no less than 1,000 people. Who knows if that's exaggerated or not? I have no idea. But it's funny that he stopped here in St. Charles to send a courier ahead, and that's where we ended our thing. And we didn't know that at the time, you know. It just all kind of came together. Again, a little bit more of the impact on Ashley, you know, impact of his life on the fur trade industry. If you look at that, the Secretary of War in 1831 notes that it is not exceeding the truth to say that $500,000 in furs are now annually brought down the Missouri River that formerly went to Hudson Bay, and it's in the enterprising spirit of General Ashley which had occasioned the change of this channel of trade. And that comes out of the Mountain Men by Carl Russell. Down here, if you look at that, that's today's dollars. That's a lot of money he's bringing down. 17.7 million in today's dollars, and he's just one guy, one company. So very, very influential on the system, which affected St. Louis. It affects, you know, that brings jobs, that brings industry, that brings, you know, stuff into Missouri, and he's doing it while he's the lieutenant governor. And I don't know if that's him or not. No clue. I think that's a George Catlin painting, but he's described as a slight man. I don't know if that's slight or not. Who knows? This picture is one that has Ashley under it in the history books. I highly doubt that is Ashley, because this is going to be controversial to some people, but beards were not common in the United States at all until 1850, period. There is no documentation that beards were socially acceptable before 1850. And I've done research through a couple of PhDs and things to vet that. And in fact, in 1830, there's a good story of a guy who's actually accosted on the street and beat to a pulp and thrown in jail for having a beard in 1830. They were seen as slovenly, filled with lice, and, you know, just unkept and just bad representation. And so as a politician who's in the state house, you know, or the lieutenant governor rather, there's no way he's going to the state house as a politician with a full beard in an era where beards are like no go, you know. So I don't think that's Ashley, but it's a great picture. This is interesting. This comes out of what I'm going to talk about in a little bit, out of the Niles Register. The Niles Register is it was kept from the 1820s to the 1840s by a guy named Niles, and a couple of years into it, his moniker underneath it is the past, the present, for tomorrow. So he records, starting in the 1820s, firsthand accounts and facts and information of things that happen locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. You can go on there and read quotes of a person who gave him the story, who was present at Napoleon Bonaparte's capture and exile. Describes everything Napoleon was taken from him and everything he was allowed to take into exile. That's how detailed the Niles Register gets. It's very in-depth. And here he talks about, I found in there his return of one of his journeys to St. Louis in March, taking about 70 days, but that detail is in this Niles Register. So it's been kind of a valuable resource for me, and you can read all kinds of things of presidents and congressional speeches and things that are happening around the globe. That just, it's crazy, crazy information. That is not Ashley. I don't know who that is. It's a cool picture. But this one, this is the first time I give this presentation, so give me a minute. Why did I put this in here? Oh, this is an excerpt of him describing going to the Great Salt Lake. So he's sitting here talking, the water lake is much salter than that of the sea. Some of the salt obtained was acquired by boiling the water, and then he brought that back with him and they used it. And so this outlines, and I would expect that this came from Ashley himself, from a journal or a letter he wrote that got put into here. And they took it from the Missouri Herald, so probably came directly from Ashley in Missouri. I often read, or I've often read, some people will say in their personal opinions of mountain men that, you know, Ashley as a fur trade owner wasn't really a mountain man. And I would disagree. I would say you would throw mountain man, you would throw businessman in there, you would throw politician in there, all of those titles. This is just some of the trails that he rode and some of the places that he went, doing exploration, trapping himself throughout the years, 1824, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, you know, the places that he had gone to in Great Salt Lake, and there's more around it that just doesn't fit on a screen. But so the guy clearly, you know, from what I've read, clearly trapped, knew how to trap, clearly knew how to survive out on the land. You know, some of the experiences he went through getting to the first rendezvous, you know, he cached supplies, he got rid of horses, he built bull boats himself and floated down the river to the Green River to the first rendezvous. And so the guy was all over the place, and most of the time he's doing this as the lieutenant governor. So he's either very efficient in his time as lieutenant governor, or lieutenant governor was such a useless position that he didn't need to be back there. I don't know which. But in his political career, which I found fascinating, he was always a champion of the West, because if you study Ashley and the rendezvous system, you know, when the mountain men go out, this whole fallacy that they were, you know, tanning their own hides and making their own buckskins is just total Hollywood bunk. Okay, they went out in their cloth clothing. Their cloth clothing would wear out. Then it would trade with the Indians, who had brain tan hides but made in Indian style. So an Indian shirt was 2 hides and then just an arm sewn on. Okay, and that's what they were trading for. They would come back to rendezvous, you know, and they would get back into cloth clothing, go back, repeat the process. There's a very good, if you want to know a very good description of how they felt about buckskins, go to the end of the book Undaunted Courage by Stephen Ambrose about the Lewis and Clark expedition, where when they finally get done, they hated buckskins so bad, the entire crew stood around a bonfire, and it describes it as they ceremoniously stripped naked, threw their buckskins on the bonfire, and danced around the fire while they burned naked, and then put on clothing to celebrate getting no more buckskins. They were like, we're done with buckskins, okay? So, you know, with the West, you have them trading with the Indians to get buckskins. Then the rendezvous system starts, you know, and as material starts to come in, or buckskins that were made in St. Louis start to go out, now the Indians see American patterns. They now learn how to do gussets. They can make cloth shirts. They trade with trappers they make, you know, buckskins. And they also got buckskins off the commercial market here to wear out there. So he really, the trade, it really opened the expansion into the West, and the westward movement through that rendezvous system and the interaction with the Native American tribes. he always had intimate knowledge of the West and the Native American tribes, and always was a voice for the Indian affairs and the economic and fiscal problems of the West. He was very cognizant of what the expansion was doing to the tribes, and I wouldn't say he was a sympathizer. I would say he was taking a more practical look on how do we do things to keep their way of life from being destroyed. He wanted a buffer between trading posts and their tribes to keep liquor away and things like that. And served on the Committee for Indian Affairs, protected both races. He really opposed excessive appropriations for the Indian Department. I think I have a slide on that to talk about that. Again, very fiscally conservative and fiscally minded, not to waste taxpayer dollars. And here it is. He wanted a 30-mile strip, actually, between the last settlement and the tribes to prevent easy access of, to liquor. Loyalty constituents never questioned. Very, very honorable guy with integrity. His first speech for Missourians was to advocate for more representation in Congress for Missouri. That's his first speech as a congressman. And then he did secure $50,000 to improve the navigation of the Missouri River, which I don't know what that equates to today, but probably a couple of $1 million. And then amends the same bill in 32 to extend the national highway from Vandalia, Illinois to Jeff City, Missouri, out here. So very, very active in his political career as a congressman. In the Niles Register, this is what I was talking about. In the Niles Register, you can read a lot of his speeches and things. If you're a history buff, this is what I was talking about. The Niles Register, the past, the present, for the future. And this is 1832. If you look that up on the internet, you just put in Niles Register, it'll come right up. And then if you're up all hours of the night reading it and your wife's mad at you, just blame me, because you're going to love this. For history people, you're going to love it. I mean, I'm telling you, there is stuff in there. Look, I live in upstate New York. He has a recording of guys digging a well. They hit a salt brine vein and salt water just comes boiling out, and they can't stop it. They can't plug it up. So they go into making salt and selling salt into the salt business. But that's a little tiny local incident that happened that's in the Niles Register compared to reading about the exile of Napoleon. That's how vast it is. And it's a total, it's fascinating. It's just fascinating. In here, in one of these, so right here you have an Indian agent who is doing his job and reached the city with the sub-agent, and one item of $700 would be given to that agent as extra allowance for collecting this party. I think he brought in 4 Indians and returning with them. And Ashley is saying, wait a minute, all you did was your job. You were supposed to go get these 4, bring them here, and then take them back. You're getting paid for that. Why are you filing a receipt for another $700? He's like, no. And he gets it voted down and turned down. So he's very astute, and he's not just sitting in Congress. He's paying attention and he's doing things. He's a really good businessman and politician. And so they reduced the amount of the item, deducting the $700 from it. And he says the agent had continued to receive his full salary and also his traveling expenses. This was quite enough, is what Ashley says. This is quite enough. Niles Register. So kind of my concluding slide, I think, is, at the end of the day, people say, he was a businessman, he was a politician, was he really, a mountain man? What is a mountain man? What describes a mountain man, Well, if it's the ability to survive in the Rocky Mountains, check. Trap beaver, well, I know he did that, besides having people trap for him, check. Hunt for meat, check. How long does it take to be qualified? Okay, so if you go out there as one of Ashley's 100, and you're on his records as being an employee and you get killed in 6 months, does that qualify? I mean, he spent a couple of years traveling the trails out there and trapping and hunting, This is my personal thing. I think that people that do living history, and I don't want you to take this the wrong way and in any kind of arrogant way or anything, but if you're going to portray living history, you should be able to do the things that they did, not a thing. And I feel like I do a pretty good job, because on the Ashley's return trip, we were able to travel by horse. We built a bull boat. We traveled on foot, and we traveled on a keel boat. So does that mean you're a mountain? What if somebody only went out on a horse? Well, I don't know, you know. But these guys, if you read, all of them knew how to build a bull boat. They were all, at some point, had been on a keel boat going out and coming back from the fur trade. And when trappers went back on a keel boat, they weren't sitting there, you know, drinking Darjeeling and watching the stars. They were rowing or they were working. They were part of the crew. They were expected to work and to serve on the keel boat. Certainly, he could speak by sign language. He was a leader, clearly a fighter, and a survivor, and he lived. You know, does that mean if you die, you're not a fur trapper, or does it mean you got to live and come out? I don't know. I just feel like when I look at William Henry Ashley, the impact on the fur trade, the fact that he could go out and trap and survive, come back, be a politician, help expand the West, help expand Missouri, help do all these things. He's really, I think, at the end of the day, from reading and researching him for a year, he was like Missouri's hidden treasure. This guy needs more publicity. And when they declare the Hawken rifle as the official firearm of the state of Missouri, there ought to be a painting of that rifle with Ashley holding it, because he's the first Ashley Hawken, and what he did for the fur trade in Missouri is just exponential. The guy never quit, he never stopped, but again, I can't tell you anything about his personal life. There's nothing out there. But very focused, very serious guy. So it's been an interesting journey for me. You know, we did the actual journey in 2019. We got the idea in 17. We trained 2 years. We did the journey in 2019. And that journey never has really stopped. For me, it's been understanding more about Ashley, more about that journey. I've talked to some guys that were on the Lewis and Clark expedition, and it's the same for them. Even though they did that expedition in 2004 and the 200th anniversary, they're still researching. There's still guys out here that are on that journey that are still trying to understand more about that journey and the role that they played and the person that they played in that. And so it's been a very interesting journey for me, and I hope to build on this some more and find some more facts about him. But he's just a very cryptic guy. Not my last slide. So this was on our journey. We actually stopped at his grave. He died upstream, or is buried and died upstream from here. But I thought this was a very interesting quote about him from American Monthly Magazine, where they said, he was a remarkable man, one of the best types of Western pioneers, generous, brave, and daring. He was a soul of honor and commanded universal respect. He won the confidence, affection, and admiration of the inhabitants of Missouri before and after the admission of the state into the Union. Tall and graceful, I don't know about tall, as Andrew Jackson, his presence was commanding, his bearing dignified, and his manners elegant. His great integrity and native intelligence added to a strong will and force of character and experience and knowledge of men made him truly a man of mark, conspicuous for his enterprise and public spirit, to whom St. Louis owes so much. I think that's a great summary of his life and of his accomplishments. But quite an amazing man. But one of the most really distinguished, prominent citizens of St. Louis. And they, you know, maybe I'll champion a cause to do something for him. I don't know. We'll see. And that's it. So I don't know. How long did I go? How much time? How long did it take? 36 minutes? Perfect. Now we have time for questions before. I am going to turn it over to Pablo. I'm going to give my time to him. He has a great presentation, so I would not move. I would stay right here for Pablo. I've watched him do presentations before. He'll keep you on edge. But any questions about Ashley or anything we talked about that you can think of? Yeah.
Slightly off topic.
Yeah.
Ashley, does it exist?
We don't know. Yes, no.
Yeah,
it exists, but we don't know it. Here's what I think. At this site, this is on Ashley's land. This is very interesting. Ashley is buried on an Indian mound. He is buried upright, facing the Missouri River. And in his deed, there's a 6-inch swath from the grave to the Missouri River. And before he died, he wanted that 6-inch swath, so if he really truly rose from the dead, he could walk from his grave to the Missouri River unimpeded by other landowners. I think he's probably buried with his Hawken. That's my guess. It's never surfaced. There's no record of him giving it to anybody. There's no record of him, losing all his gear anywhere where he might have lost it in the woods. So I'm just wild guess. I think maybe he's buried with it. Yeah. We could dig him up and find out. So, any other questions? No? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Pablo and let him get started.